Welcome to this broadcast worship service from Whitehall Baptist Church. Our desire is to glorify God by proclaiming His Word, strengthening the family, and boldly sharing Jesus Christ to the whole world. Thanks for joining us today.
All right, thank you everybody. Appreciate you coming back. Good crowd. Good crowd last night, big crowd Sunday morning, good crowd tonight. I've been reminded that I've been remiss. Every Saturday morning at 8 o'clock, some of us meet in the Family Life Center at Dyer First Baptist Church. And I go over things that have happened in the previous week with a group of people there. There's stuff happening every day. And there's enough that happens every day to go every Saturday morning and talk for more than an hour about stuff that has happened that relates to Bible prophecy. So if you're interested in something like that, First Baptist Church Dyer, 8 o'clock, Family Life Center behind the church. We'd love to have you. Tonight we want to talk about wars and rumors of wars. This is another one of those troubling or kind of scary things. All we got to do is just put our trust in Jesus Christ and everything is okay. But I think it's the reality of what's going on and the seriousness of some of these threats that make it the way it is when I say that it is troubling. This study is about 5 wars that will take place at the end of the age. Jesus said there will be wars and rumors of wars. I want to talk just briefly about the Kurds, about the Islamic State or ISIS in Iraq, Israel's neighbors. These are people that share a border with Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, this kind of thing. Syria is one of those, but I've separated them out because of a special prophecy about Syria. And then Syria, and then the battle of Gog and Magog. The Kurds. Let's talk about the Kurds just a minute. Kurdistan refers to the land of the Kurds, and this is the ancient Medes. And it includes part of Iraq and Iran and Turkey and Syria. The Kurds have their own government, but they don't have a nation. They're under these other nations, scattered out through these other nations. And they're forced to live under the governments of Iraq and Iran and Turkey and Syria. And they live in the northern mountains of Iraq. That's very important. Isaiah 13, 1 through 6 reads, the burden of Babylon, and this is the land of Babylon, and so we're talking about the land of Iraq. There's a lot of prophecy about the land of Iraq, which Isaiah the son of Amos did see. Lift ye up a banner upon the high mountain. Remember I said the Kurds are in the mountains of Iraq. Exalt the voice unto them, shake the hand that they may go into the gates of the nobles. I have commanded my sanctified ones. I have also called my mighty ones for mine anger, even them that rejoice in my highness. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord and the weapons of His indignation, to destroy the whole land. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. So Isaiah said the day of the Lord, or the tribulation period, is near. And remember, the rapture, the way I believe anyway, not all agree, is before the tribulation period. But he's saying that the day of the Lord, or the tribulation period, is near when God gathers a great multinational force in the mountains of Babylon or Iraq. For what? To destroy the whole land of Babylon or the nation of Iraq. Now be very careful about this, because that word near is vague. Near could be near in God's time, or it could be near in man's time. We only know that a multinational force in the mountains of Iraq could mean that the tribulation period is near. Now, as of now, the United States has built a temporary base in the mountains of Iraq. The United States has drawn up plans to build a permanent base in the mountains of Iraq. The United States has gathered troops from several nations at its base in the mountains of Iraq. And the United States has sent advisors to the mountains of Iraq. This is the point of all of that. It looks like that we are in the early stages of a prophecy that says the gathering of a multinational force in the mountains of Iraq is a sign that the tribulation period is near. This prophecy is just the beginning to shape up. but it could be a major sign of where we are on God's prophetic clock. I believe the Bible teaches that the Kurds, this is the Medes, will destroy rebuilt Babylon at the end of the tribulation period. The Kurds have to become more powerful to do that, and that is shaping up. The Kurds are the Medes. In the Old Testament, the Medes and the Persians diverted the Euphrates River and went under the wall of Babylon and conquered Babylon. They're the modern Kurds. The Medes are the modern Kurds. In January 2015, the Kurds defeated the Islamic State forces in a 4-month battle for a large city called Kobani. In May 2015, the Kurds captured about 220 towns and villages that the Islamic State had captured in Syria. In early June of this year, a Kurdish-supported party won several seats in the elections in Turkey. In mid-June 2015, the Kurds seized an extremely important Islamic State border crossing and supply route from Turkey. In late June 2015, the Kurds captured an important military base that the Islamic State has held since 2014. They were only 35 miles from the Islamic State's headquarters in Syria. In late June of this year, the Islamic State launched 2 surprise attacks against the Kurds to retake land the Kurds had taken from them, and the Kurds fought them off. And what we see is the Kurds are becoming more powerful. Retaking territory from the Islamic State is something that both Syria could not do and Iraq have not been able to do, but here these Kurds have been able to do it. They're fierce fighters. The only thing that's holding the Kurds back is the fact that the United States is blocking them from getting the weapons that they need. Turkey doesn't want us to let them have the weapons. Iran doesn't want us. Iraq doesn't want us. Syria doesn't want us, because all of them are afraid of the Kurds. And the Kurds are complaining that they're fighting with out-of-date Russian weapons, and the Islamic State is fighting with modern American weapons that Iraqi soldiers abandoned to ISIS. Several Arab nations are now threatening to defy the United States and start smuggling more weapons to the Kurds. In August 2015, it was reported that Germany has been giving the Kurds weapons. It was also reported that about 90 German troops are training the Kurds on how to use the weapons. In fact, there was a report this week that Israel is starting to give the Kurds weapons. So the Bible predicts that a multinational force will gather in the mountains of Iraq when the tribulation period is near, and the Kurds will rise to power. A multinational force is there today, and the Kurds are rising. This is not quite ready, but it is shaping up. God has spoken, and we know it. Second, I want to talk about the Islamic State just a minute, and we could talk all night about it. There's so much I can't tell you. I want us to go back to Isaiah 13 again. The noise of a multitude in the mountains. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord, and the weapons of his indignation, to destroy the whole land. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. There's going to be destruction, that prophet is saying, all over Iraq. The Islamic State attacked and destroyed large areas of Iraq. Iraq counterattacked and caused more destruction in Iraq. Iran helped Iraq and caused more destruction in Iraq. The multinational force attacked the Islamic State and caused even more destruction in Iraq. In June 2014, a group called ISIS took over several cities and towns in Iraq. And when ISIS entered Shiite Muslim towns and villages, the ISIS is Sunni Muslims, and when they entered Shiite Muslim towns and villages, they often destroyed the Shiite areas. In early August 2014, the Islamic State captured the large city of Mosul. The Islamic State crucified and beheaded people. Some people were buried alive. Babies were cut in half. Women and young girls were raped and sold into slavery. More than 600,000 Christians left their houses and fled to other countries. And where a lot of them went, they went to the Kurdish area because the Kurds were willing to protect them. The United Nations Security Council met and demanded that the Islamic State stop their destruction, disarm, and disband. The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution under a section of the United Nations Charter that allows them to use military force in Iraq. They've used it and caused more destruction in Iraq. Around February of this year, the Islamic State burned alive a captured Jordanian pilot. The world was stunned by the execution of this man. The next day, Jordan launched an attack that killed dozens of Islamic State fighters and caused more destruction in Iraq. On March the 1st, 2015, 23,000 troops from Iraq and Iran attacked the Islamic State to retake the Iraqi city of Tikrit. These Shiites from Iraq and Iran started killing Sunni Muslims and destroying Sunni areas in the city. They also destroyed several Sunni towns and villages. They ran into trouble. But the United States bombed Islamic State positions in and around Tikrit. Several buildings, towns, and villages were destroyed. But this is the point that I'm making with all of this. God said He will gather a multinational force to destroy the whole land of Iraq when the tribulation period is near, and there's destruction all over Iraq. Every week it is happening and has been going on now for a while. The nations that have attacked the Islamic State in Iraq includes, and I'll ask you, is this a multinational force? Syria, Hezbollah, the Kurds, Jordan, Egypt, some Iraqis, some Libyans. The United States is dropping bombs, Iran, Canada's special forces, and more than that. We've got nations over there. They could end this war in a hurry if they would, but they're not. They just destroy and destroy and destroy, a little here and a little there and so on. But the Bible predicts that the whole land of Iraq, or the land of Babylon, will be destroyed when the tribulation period is near. And what we are witnessing is destruction going all over Iraq. And the thing that I want you to see out of here is that this is a sign that we are getting close to the tribulation period. God has spoken, and we know it. Third, I want to talk about Israel's neighbors, except for Syria. This is Psalm 83. This prophecy is about a group of nations that share a border with Israel, called the inner circle of nations. I will separate out Syria and deal with Syria in a few minutes. Psalm 83 was written by a Jewish prophet and priest named Asaph. Asaph served at the temple in Israel during the reigns of King David and King Solomon, about 950 years before Jesus. Psalm 83 is an imprecatory prayer. Now, an imprecatory prayer is a prayer that asks God to deal with Israel's enemies at a time of great danger to Israel, such as the perilous time that we are living in right now. And since Asaph was both a prophet and a priest, some writers believe Psalm 83 is both a prophecy and a prayer. If Psalm 83 is a prophecy, it has never been fulfilled because this group of nations has never attacked Israel at the same time in the past. But they are lined up to attack Israel right now. I want to take a verse-by-verse, very quick look at Psalm 83. It's amazing what is in there and how it ties in with modern events. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. So Asaph in verse 1 knows that Israel's enemies want to destroy Israel. He loves Israel. He wants Israel to survive. But he understands that God is going to have to help Israel, or the nation of Israel is ultimately going to be destroyed. Verse 2 describes the attitude of Israel's enemies toward God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. Asaph called Israel's enemies God's enemies. And he said they make a tumult, they riot, they throw rocks, they burn tires, they fire rockets and missiles into Israel, and all of that kind of thing. Asaph said, Israel's enemies hate thee. Israel's enemies are the Muslims, okay? And the Muslims hate Jehovah. Why? Because they love Allah, a different God. And Asaph says they have lifted up the head. The Muslims have taken a defiant stand against the God of Israel, Jehovah. And they don't respect Him. And they don't respect the Bible. They ignore the Bible, and they go by the Quran. They've written their own scriptures and that kind of thing. They quote the Quran and say, Allah is competent to give us, the Muslims, victory over Israel. Well, He hasn't yet. And there's more than 50 nations of them. And they've got some of them nuclear bombs and so on. And Israel is a little bitty nation. And they haven't been able to do it. Israel's God says He's going to give Israel the victory. And they get every victory. Verse 3 says Israel's enemies will unite in their opposition to Israel. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. Israel's enemies formed the Arab League, Hamas, Hezbollah, and other groups that regularly meet to discuss how they are going to destroy the little nation of Israel. Verse 4 tells us what Israel's enemies will say. They will say, come and let us cut them off from being a nation. Now remember, this was written, 950 years or whatever before Jesus Christ. And we're living it today. Let us cut them off from being a nation. Let us push them into the sea. Let us wipe them out. They're a cancer on the face of this earth, and all of this kind of thing. And that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. They won't even recognize the existence of Israel. They will oppose God by agreeing to destroy the tiny nation of Israel. They'll plan the total destruction of Israel so that no one will ever think of that little nation again. Verse 5 tells us what Israel's enemies are going to do. For they have consulted together with one consent, they are confederate against thee. Israel's enemies will confederate against thee. That means the Muslims are going to unite in their opposition to Jehovah. They're going to oppose what God said about Israel's future. In 2014, with the peace negotiations going on, Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas refused to recognize the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. The Arab League backed him up. They were united in their opposition to the existence of the little nation of Israel. They started an intifada, riots and things like that because they refused to give them East Jerusalem and more. Israel's enemies are listed in verses 6 through 8. Now, how did God know almost 3,000 years ago that Jordan would oppose Israel, that Saudi Arabia would oppose Israel, that Egypt would oppose Israel, that Lebanon would oppose Israel, that the Palestinians would oppose Israel? Fighters from Iraq and Syria, partly controlled by the Islamic State, will oppose Israel. For your information, the nations mentioned in Psalm 83, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, the Palestinian Authority, Syria, and Iraq, are the same nations that the Islamic State claims for their caliphate. I cannot say for sure, but the Psalm 83 war and the war with the Islamic State could turn out to be the same war. Asaph begins to make requests as he's praying to God. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kishon, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Asaph asked God to defeat his enemies like he did in the days of Deborah. He prayed that God would make the carcasses of his enemies like manure for the soil. I always have to pause and comment on that. I've never prayed that God would make the bodies of somebody like manure for the soil. Or maybe I just don't know how to pray, but that's the way he was praying. Many are being killed in Egypt and Syria and Iraq today. Asaph's second request: make their nobles or their leaders like Oreb and like Zeb, yea, all their princes as Zebah and as Zalmunna, who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. Asaph prayed that God would destroy the kings and leaders of Syria and Egypt and Iraq and so on, like God did in the days of Gideon, because the leaders of Syria and Egypt and Iraq and so on falsely claimed the houses of God to belong to them. Saddam Hussein was removed from power. Hosni Mubarak has been removed from power. Rebels are trying to remove Bashar Assad from power. All of that kind of thing. Muslims claim the Temple Mount. There's rioting going on the Temple Mount. See, they're claiming that that holy site belongs to them. Now, there weren't any Muslims 950 years before Jesus came. Muhammad lived about 700 years after Jesus, okay? But they didn't exist, and they're claiming the Temple Mount. We know who built that temple up there, Solomon. David wanted to. And we know who built it back, Zerubbabel, and Herod expanded it and so on. And there were no Muslims when those temples were built. And the Muslims call the Temple Mount and Patriarch's Tomb and Rachel's Cave Islamic holy sites. And they say these holy sites belong to us, just like the Bible here is saying that they're going to say. The Palestinian Authority claimed to the United Nations that complained to the United Nations that Israel is trying to seize Islamic holy sites. They're trying to seize the Mount of Olives. They're trying to seize the Temple Mount and so on. Muslims would love to have the Mount of Olives. Jesus is coming back to the Mount of Olives. See, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop God's word from being fulfilled. It's the devil underneath all of this, trying to destroy the nation of Israel. Israel was in possession of these places hundreds of years before Islam ever came into being. But the Palestinian Authority wants the United Nations to stop Israel from trying to take their holy sites. In February 2014, Muslims claimed the Jewish Wailing Wall belongs to them. That is not a Muslim holy site. It belongs to Israel. Well, let me say it another way. It's another talk. It belongs to God. God scattered the nations at the Tower of Babel. And He gave away this whole world. You go into Africa, you go into Asia, you go into Europe. And there's only one place on this earth God didn't tell people to go. Only one place on this earth that God kept for Himself, and it's the Promised Land. And He set it aside for a special purpose. The Redeemer of the world will die there. The Redeemer of the world is coming back to this place. And He's going to rule this world, and peace and justice and righteousness will go all over this world. But they don't want Christians to carry a Bible on the Temple Mount and things like that. They don't want Jews and Christians praying on the Temple Mount and things like that. King Solomon built the first temple there. But Muslims call Israel occupiers. Israel is not occupiers. The Muslims are the occupiers. Asaph's third request. Oh my God, make them like a wheel as the stubble before the wind, as the fire burneth the wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire. Asaph asked God to spin Egypt and Iraq and Lebanon and the Palestinian Authority like stubble in the whirlwind. He asked God to treat his enemies, the Muslims, like a pile of wood in a fire. I've got to work on my prayer. Like dry brush in a raging wall of flames, or on a burning mountain, you know. I guess, I don't know, maybe I've got the Trump syndrome. I'm not politicking, but Asaph's fourth request. So persecute them with thy tempest and make them afraid with thy storm. He asked God to pour out His wrath upon the Muslims and to make them afraid of Him. Asaph's fifth request. Fill their faces with shame. Why? Why is he praying like this? That they may seek thy name, O Lord. They're going to have to learn that Allah is not God. They're going to have to learn that Jehovah is God, and that's what He's really after. He wants God to shame the Muslims in Iraq and Egypt and the Palestinian Authority and so on, so they will seek Him. Egyptian President Mubarak's government fell in 2011, and there's been instability there ever since. Civil war broke out in Syria in 2011, and there's been problems there ever since. Civil wars raging in Iraq with the Iraqis and the Kurds, and they're fighting each other and so on, threatening each other. Problems. Asaph's sixth request. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish. He's asking God, to confuse and trouble the people of Iraq and Egypt and the Palestinian Authority, and they really are. They don't know what to do. He said, if they do not turn to you, let them perish and be ashamed. He wants them to be saved. And if they don't turn to Jesus Christ, they are going to perish. We need to turn to Jesus Christ, all of us. That's the only way to be saved. Verse 18, the reason for Asaph's prayer. That men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth. Jehovah rules the whole world. And He wants everybody to know that Jehovah rules this whole world. And he asked God to defend His name so the whole world will know that Jehovah is God. Ultimately, if they keep trying to destroy Israel and they keep losing, they're going to find out that they're on the wrong side. And a lot of them are going to get saved. It doesn't matter whether Israel's enemies are Baal worshipers or Ishtar worshipers or Allah worshipers. The time is going to come when God will deal with all who worship false gods in a very decisive way. He is not going to allow His people to be wiped out by those who worship Allah or any other false god. So some think that the Bible predicts that the Palestinians will unite and that they will claim the holy sites and that they will oppose Jehovah and that they will try to destroy Israel at the end of the age. And that appears to be happening. God has spoken and we know it. I want to talk about Syria just a minute, Isaiah 17. Bad news for Syria and also for northern Israel. The burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. The cities of Aurora are forsaken. They shall be for flocks which shall lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria. They shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. And in that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. The burden of Damascus means this is a prophecy about Damascus, and Damascus is the capital of Syria. The cities of Aurora are suburbs close to Damascus. Ephraim is one of the 12 tribes of Israel that settled in the northern part of Israel, near Israel's border with Lebanon. Isaiah's prophecy means that Syria and Israel are going to get into a war. This is important. We'll come with current events in a few minutes. Syria and Israel will get into a war at the end of the age, and Damascus, Syria, will cease to exist as a city. How fast? In one night. Now, Damascus has been destroyed and rebuilt many times, but it's never ceased to exist as a city in one night. It will cease to exist as a city in one night in the future. But it's going to take a very big explosion for it to cease as a city in one night. God uses the phrase in that day 3 times in chapter 17. It refers to the end of the age. This is saying Damascus will become a ruinous heap at the end of the age. Some of the cities in northern Israel are also going to be destroyed. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim. That's one of the tribes of Israel. The glory of Jacob, his name was changed to Israel, shall be made thin. Israel is going to be greatly weakened. And many Jews are going to go hungry, but the nation is not going to be destroyed. This war is going to cause many men to turn to God, the God of Israel. Verse 7, at that day shall a man look to his Maker, and his eyes shall have respect to who? The Holy One of Israel. They're going to get the idea. War is a bad thing, but war that causes people to respect the God of Israel is a good thing. It keeps them from going to hell. Verse 10 reveals why God is going to let this happen to Israel. Because thou hast forgotten the God of thy salvation, and hast not been mindful of the rock, Jesus is the rock, of thy strength. Israel doesn't know Jesus Christ. Israel is going to have to get the idea that Jesus is their Messiah too. And they're going to have to get saved out of all of this and turn to Christ. And they will at the end of the tribulation period. But God is going to allow war because Israel has forgotten that Jesus Christ is their Messiah. He's our Messiah. He's saved the whole world. Anyone that will accept Jesus Christ can be saved. God is going to use war to bring repentance and salvation to multitudes of people. And multitudes are going to get saved. In March 2011, a civil war broke out in Syria. President Assad threatened to attack Israel if the EU and U.S. didn't stop supporting the rebels. Now remember, we're talking about war between Syria and Israel, and here Syria's president is threatening Israel. Israel did what? Threatened to blow up Damascus? Maybe somebody ought to go read Isaiah 17. A city of 1.7 million people. How are you going to destroy a city of 1.7 million people? Now that was 2011. A lot of people had fled. And if you count the suburbs, and we see that the suburbs, some of them are going to be destroyed too, 2.6 million people. How are you going to destroy a city of that many people in one night? Now that's an awesome thought. It's going to take a big bomb to do that. That's bad stuff. Russia started sending missiles to Syria. On May the 14th, 2013, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu flew to Russia for an emergency meeting with President Vladimir Putin to ask him to stop sending sophisticated missiles to Syria. Mr. Netanyahu warned Mr. Putin that Israel will destroy those missiles if you keep sending them to Syria. Mr. Putin warned Mr. Netanyahu that Israel is headed for a war with Syria. That's what the Bible is saying. Israel's headed for a war with Syria, and Putin, that's coming out of Putin's mouth. And he says, you can drag in Russia. Now this is going to be, Russia's involvement is going to be in the next war that we're going to talk about. Here we're talking about what's in the news. Russia kept shipping the missiles to Syria, and guess what? Israel kept destroying them. In August 2013, someone used chemical weapons against the rebels in Syria. The United Nations, the United States, and others blamed Syria. President Obama threatened to attack Syria. Russia, Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah warned the United States not to attack Syria. Syria threatened to fire 100,000 missiles and rockets at Israel. Now Israel said, we're not going to try to shoot them down one at a time. We're going to go down there and try to take all 100,000 out of them with one bomb. So it's coming into what the Bible says. But did you realize that at that time, Israel and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and France went on war alert? We came this close to this war. Russia put her Navy and rapid deployment forces on war alert. The United States deployed planes to bases near Syria. Russia deployed troops to Syria. John Kerry suggested that Syria could avoid war by destroying her chemical weapons. Syria agreed to ship them out of the country for destruction. President Obama withdrew America's ships and planes. But we have already come close to getting into this war, and it's something that's supposed to happen at the end of the age. Okay? Maybe the grace of God is holding it off for a while. December the 7th, 2014, Syria accused Israel of bombing several sites near Damascus. Citizens reported 10 loud explosions near the town of Demas. Israel was accused of destroying Russian S-300 missiles that Syria was transferring to Hezbollah in Lebanon. In December 2014, Russia asked Hezbollah and Syria to draw up plans for what? An attack on Israel if the West attacked Syrian troops. A few days later, Russia made a second request for Hezbollah and Syria, what? To draw up plans for an attack on Israel. This has been in the Bible for 2,700 years. And we're seeing it shape up as we meet here tonight. Russia did not ask Hezbollah and Syria to attack Israel, but Russia asked them to draw up plans for a war with Israel. And they wanted these plans drawn up for two reasons. One, in case the United States and EU keep trying to topple President Assad. And they do. They are. And two, in case the United States and EU keep applying sanctions against Russia for invasion of Crimea. If you're watching the news, you know we just sent 5 jets over there, and we're talking about sending more planes there, and we are accusing Russia of trying to take over Ukraine. This is still going on. So war is prophesied, and Russia has asked Hezbollah and Syria to draw up plans for a war. In mid-January of this year, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah announced that Hezbollah is ready to go to war with Israel. If we know our Bible and then watch the news, you just see this unfolding. On May the 4th, it was reported that Sunni rebels that are trying to topple Bashar Assad are moving closer to Damascus. It was also reported that Islamic State troops are gaining ground against President Assad. Some experts said Damascus could now be facing a significant military threat. On May the 11th, it was reported that Syria is losing its civil war and the Syrian military may soon collapse. Whether it will or not, I don't know. On May the 21st this year, it was reported that the Islamic State now controls about 50% of Syria. ISIS has got 50% of Syria. Rebels fighting in Syria's civil war control another 25%. Syria only controls about 25% of their own nation. And remember that Assad said before he will fall or before he lets his government be toppled, he will attack Israel. So it's a serious situation. On May the 31st of this year, it was reported that Damascus is almost surrounded by rebels and Islamic State troops. The report said Russia, Hezbollah, and Iran have started removing some of their advisors and their families from Syria. The report said that we could be witnessing the last days of the Syrian regime. Well, that occurs at the end of the age. Following cross-border rocket fire in the third week of August, this month now, Prime Minister Netanyahu and some of his military staff visited Israel's border just the other day. Went up to the border with Syria. And Mr. Netanyahu concluded that it may not be soon, but Israel is eventually going to have to invade Syria. He ordered the Israeli military to prepare for an invasion of Syria. What am I telling you? We've had a prophecy since the days of Isaiah that said Israel and Syria will get into a war. And Mr. Netanyahu went to the border just a few days ago and told the military to prepare for an invasion of Syria. Now, I don't know whether it will come or not or when, but this is what's going on. It's impossible to say who is going to come out on top in Syria, President Assad, the Islamic State, or the rebels. But all of them want to destroy Israel. And President Assad has said he will launch an all-out attack on Israel before he lets his government fall. And that would trigger this prophesied war. So the Bible says war will break out between Syria and Israel at the end of the age, and both sides have troops near the border right now. God has spoken, and we know it. The last war that I want to talk about is called the Battle of Gog and Magog. It's in Ezekiel 38 and 39. This war concerns a group of nations that come from a long way off to attack Israel. Some people refer to them as the outer circle of nations because they don't share a border with Israel. God gave 3 clues about when this war will take place. God's first clue about when this war will take place is it will be in the latter days and the latter years. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land. It shall be in the latter days. The latter years and latter days means this is going to happen at the very end of the age. Now, if we are close to this war, then that means that we are close to the latter years and the latter days. God's second clue about when this war will take place is Jewish immigration. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword and is gathered out of many people. Where are they coming to? Against the mountains of Israel, which have always been waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. So he's telling this army, you are going to attack Israel. But he's also saying Israel is going to come back into being. So it's going to happen after Israel becomes a nation again. On September the 27th, Israel began a new year. There were 6,186,100 Jews living in Israel, about 75% of the population. Jews have returned from more than 120 nations. So we're looking for a war in the latter years and latter days that will happen after Israel, the Jews, have returned. God's third clue about when this war will take place, Israel will be dwelling safely. Those who return to Israel shall dwell safely, all of them. Now, some prophecy teachers say dwelling safely means this war will take place after the Antichrist confirms a covenant for 7 years of peace in the Middle East. Other prophecy teachers, including myself, believe Israel is dwelling safely today. Now, I didn't say Israel has peace, because Israel doesn't have peace. But I said Israel is dwelling safely because they can't destroy Israel. Israel is safely under the protection of Jehovah. Okay? And they cannot be destroyed. All right? So this war will take place in the latter days and latter years after Israel has become a nation again and the Jews have returned from many nations, when the Jews are dwelling safely, and all of these conditions appear to exist right now. In 2010, Russia completed work on a nuclear reactor that she built in Iran. Iran said if she can build nuclear weapons, she will use them on Israel. Now, this is why this agreement with Iran is so important. It's in the news. Big vote coming up in the House and Senate in next month. Israel threatened to destroy Iran's nuclear reactor before she gets the bomb. On January the 15th, 2012, Russia warned Israel and the West that an attack on Iran would be considered an attack on Moscow. Now, Israel is debating on whether they want to bomb those nuclear facilities or not. Russia says you do that and we will consider it an attack on Moscow. Russia said a military strike on Iran heightens the prospect of World War III. So when we're talking about this Iranian nuclear reactor, we're talking about the prospect of World War III. We're not talking about a little bitty thing. On October the 1st, 2013, Israeli Prime Minister stood before the United Nations and said, Israel will not allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. Our president has just agreed to let Iran get nuclear weapons. In the summer of 2014, it was reported that Israel budgeted almost $3 billion in 2013. What for? To prepare for a war with Iran. At the same time, it was reported that Israel budgeted almost $3 billion more in 2014. What for? To prepare for a war with Iran. Would that be an attack on Moscow? Would that be considered that? Would that be considered World War III? On September the 29th, 2014, Prime Minister Netanyahu, he stood before the United Nations again. He does this every year. And he said, Iran is a greater threat to Israel and the world than is ISIS. And he added that Iran must not be allowed to have nuclear weapons. But there's agreement, if Congress passes it, that we'll let them have it. In mid-January 2015, Iran announced that it is building and operating factories in Syria to produce rockets and missiles for what? An attack on Israel. Iran also said she is operating missile sites in Syria for what? An attack on Israel. In March of this year, Mr. Netanyahu called Iran's nuclear program dangerous to humanity. And he said it must be stopped. On April the 30th of this year, Vice President Joe Biden spoke at the annual dinner of the Washington Institute of Near East Policy. And he said Iran is just days away from construction of at least 8 nuclear weapons. It is important to remember that Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel will not let Iran get nuclear weapons. In the first week of May of this year, Israel's Major General of the Reserve said, Iran's single-minded goal is to acquire nuclear weapons. He said Iran has to be stopped, and it is time to stop Iran. He said Israel wants a P5 plus 1, that's 5 permanent members of the Security Council, plus 1, that was, I've forgotten who it is, but to apply severe sanctions on Iran. But Israel doesn't think that it will happen, that they would apply sanctions. He said Israel is going to have to fight Iran. On July the 5th of this year, it was reported that the Israeli Defense Forces has appointed a special team to plan for a potential Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities if an attack is needed. The report said this planning team was appointed because Israel believes the P5 plus 1 was about to sign an agreement that would require an Israeli military strike. On July the 14th of this year, after 13 years of on-again, off-again talks, 4 final deadlines, and 4 overtime sessions, Iran and the P5 plus 1 group struck a deal. Congress has 60 days to vote it up or down, but they will have to overcome a presidential veto if they vote it down. Prime Minister Netanyahu called this a stunning, historic mistake. He said Israel will not be bound by it because Iran still seeks the destruction of Israel. Iranians danced in the street and shouted death to America and death to Israel. Many prophecy teachers think the odds of an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities have just gone up. We're talking about the latter days and the latter years. Some say it is a matter of when, not if. This could be a world-changing event. On July the 15th of this year, J.E. Dyer, a retired United States Naval Intelligence officer, listed the top 5 reasons why he thinks the United States has made a bad deal. I can think of some more. It lets Iran get a nuclear bomb in about 10 years if they keep the agreement, and about 3 months if they break the agreement. 2, it lets Iran get hundreds of billions of dollars that can be used to buy weapons and fund terrorism. 3, the United States is siding with Iran against Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and others. 4, it will trigger an arms race in the Middle East. 5, it will require our allies in Europe to have an anti-missile defense system to defend against Iranian nuclear weapons because they have missiles that will reach Europe. On July the 15th of this year, United States National Security Advisor Susan Rice was interviewed on CNN. She said the United States expects that some of the sanctions relief money Iran will receive under the nuclear deal will go to fund terrorism in the Middle East. We're going to let them have billions of dollars, and it will go to fund terrorism in the Middle East. On August 8, 2015, it was reported that John Kerry's daughter, now John Kerry helped negotiate this treaty, Dr. Vanessa Kerry is married to an Iranian-American, Dr. Brian Nahid, that was born in Iran. Dr. Nahid's best man at the wedding, Mohammed Zarif, is the same man that John Kerry negotiated the Iranian nuclear agreement with. Put another way, John Kerry negotiated the Iranian nuclear agreement with his son-in-law's best man. Some are suggesting that this could be why John Kerry agreed to let the Iranians take their own soil samples, why he agreed to protect the Iranian nuclear reactors from sabotage, why he agreed to side agreements with the United Nations that Congress can't see. On August the 8th, Israel's Defense Minister Moshe Lan said, ultimately, it is very clear, one way or another, Iran's military nuclear program must be stopped. We will act in any way, including taking military action, and are not willing to tolerate a nuclear-armed Iran. He said, we prefer that this be done by means of sanctions, but in the end, Israel should be able to defend itself. We're talking about the latter days and latter years, folks. And it's real. Israel ordered long-range refueling tankers from the United States to refuel her bombers if it becomes necessary to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. On August the 10th, that should be 2015, it was reported that the United States has delayed the delivery of these refueling planes. Israel is now converting Boeing 767s to refuel her bombers during an attack on Iran. In early August of this year, President Obama said, if Congress doesn't pass the bill, that's his agreement with Iran, in September, there will be war in the Middle East. He said, let's not mince words. The choice we face is ultimately between diplomacy and some sort of war. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not 3 months from now, but soon. This is out of the mouth of the President of the United States, and put that upside the prophecy. The Bible says it will happen in the latter days and latter years. On August the 19th, it was reported that a secret side deal between the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency and Iran will let Iran inspect itself. Oh boy. Now, if we think Iran's violating the agreement, Iran can inspect themselves. And they can fill out the forms on the inspection. And they can make sure that Iran is not violating this agreement. You know what was revealed today? That if they have to inspect themselves, the United States will pay the inspectors' salaries. The White House and State Department, I said I had more than 5 things against this deal. If the White House and State Department said they are comfortable with this arrangement. One official sarcastically said, one must welcome this global innovation and out-of-the-box thinking. God's view of Israel, and thou shalt come up against my people of Israel, See, I said he didn't give that area away. I will bring thee against my land, and I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains. God has not forgotten that the Jews are his people, Israel is his land, and the mountains are his mountains, and the latter days and the latter years. Some people believe that the church has replaced Israel. But we're looking at a prophecy that will take place in the latter years and latter days. And God says, my people of Israel. He says, my land, and he says, my mountains. The Jews are still God's people. And the land belongs to him. And in spite of all of their rebellion, the grace of God is going to prevail. He's still going to work to save many Jews. Verse 16 gives another a reason for this war. I will bring thee against my land that the heathen may know me. Same thing as in Psalm 83. When I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. Russia and her Islamic allies are lost. And God plans to defeat them so people will know that Israel's God is God. What's going to happen? There will be a great shaking in the land of Israel, perhaps nuclear war. Every man's sword shall be against his brother. They're going to start fighting each other. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him and upon his bands and upon the many people that are with him, and overflowing rain and great hailstones and fire and brimstone like Sodom and Gomorrah. And the result, God will magnify his name. We may be watching all of this on TV. Sanctifying himself and be known in the eyes of many nations. Many people will know that Israel's God is God. And Russia and her Islamic allies are going to be defeated. And Israel is going to win. And it will take Israel 7 months to bury the dead and 7 years to burn the weapons. A panel of experts was commissioned way back in 2010 to study what would happen if this war broke out. And they said, 1, the price of oil will skyrocket. 2, fear will explode in the world's financial markets. It's already there, and this war didn't do it. World trade will seize up. Military spending will escalate. Russia will greatly benefit because she exports a lot of oil. Massive inflation will occur. The price of gold will soar, and so on. What I believe, God's miraculous defeat of Russia and her allies will change this world. Are we going to be living in a different world 1 month from tonight? It will allow the European Union to gain more power. It will cause a clamor for a powerful world leader to take over and establish world peace. They're going to talk about this at the United Nations next month. It will greatly diminish the Islamic religion. It will cause unbelievers to call for the global ethic to be enforced and result in the persecution of those who have other religious beliefs. My view of what will happen, war will eventually break out. I don't know when. It looks like we're close. I've thought that way for a long time. Between Israel and Egypt and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Palestinians, Israel is finally going to turn to powerful bombs. And she's going to win a major victory, but she's going to suffer a lot of damage. This war will spread. It will take in Russia and Iran and Turkey and Libya and Ethiopia and others. But no weapon formed against Israel will succeed. God is going to destroy Israel's enemies. What about the rapture? We don't know when the rapture is. It is just my opinion, and has been for years, that the rapture could be at or about the same time as the battle of Gog and Magog. That's a strong statement because we're staring the battle of Gog and Magog in the face, perhaps. The threats and facts that Israel has already budgeted money for this war are too serious to ignore. So the Bible says war will break out between Israel and Iran at the end of the age, and that seems to be shaping up. God has spoken, and we know it. If you think it's important for people to know this, tell them about it. We'd love to go to other churches. And that's all I have, Brother Chris.